the cloud. There we go. So just a reminder again, we love interaction and questions and using your reaction buttons. So please do stay engaged during the session. When you feel like asking a question, feel free to raise your hand or ask the question in the chat. It is a very small group today, so feel free to just stop and shout out any questions so we can make it meaningful for you. And we will start with, as we always do our sessions, our territorial acknowledgement. So I want to acknowledge all the Indigenous people in Ontario and their traditional territories, all the nations across this province that have called this land their home for thousands of years. We are all here leaders in education, so it is our duty and our commitment to amplify Indigenous stories, perspectives, and issues. I am logging in today from the town of Whitby, which is east of Toronto. I am an immigrant and a settler on this land, and I want to acknowledge the lands and the people of Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, whose territory I am occupying today. This is covered under the Williams Treaties. My family and I are situated on the territory of the Mississaugas, who are a branch of the Greater Anishinaabeg Nation, which includes Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. So wherever you're logging in from today, I invite you to reflect on those nations that have been caretakers of the land that you're on. To take a moment to recognize their history, their contributions, both historically and contemporary, and to think about where we can each make a meaningful action on a personal level to support the Indigenous communities now as well as into the future. There is a link there for you to explore, and we do have a PDF version of this, not a PDF, a viewable version of this. Isabella, I think it's in the notes section of slide 1. If you wouldn't mind sharing that as well, that would be great. So my name is Iniel, and I am one of the presenters today, along with...
I'm Isabella, and welcome. Thank you so much for, I love seeing familiar faces. Thank you so much for joining us in the last 3 sessions. Yeah, we're excited.
So these sessions today are brought to you by OECM in partnership with Dell Technologies and ALP Advancing Learning Partnerships. The sessions were designed in consultation with Ontario educators, and this is one of, as I mentioned, one of 3 sessions that we have offered and curated. There are other sessions currently available on the OECM website, and the bit.ly is there. And on the PDF, on the shareable slide deck, it should be hyperlinked. That actually go on for until the end of February and even early March, I believe. So feel free to check those out as well. So as this session is our 3rd session, and today we're going to be playing a lot more with Google Sheets. In the past 2 sessions and today's session as well, we have sort of grounded the work that we're doing on the text street data by Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan. And it is a great text if you are looking for something edu professional to read in terms of classroom practice as well as system level changes and transformation as well. So we will be grounding our work sort of in that, the text, but also finding other tech tools to incorporate. These 2 questions were questions that we kind of kept going back to in terms of focusing our work together. And we were talking about data, and more importantly, street data that is separate from satellite and map data. So we wanted to ask, how can data have the capacity to diagnose some root causes of inequity in your spaces? And how might data have the potential to transform, not just improve, but transform learning and the power to reshape outcomes for student success, for well-being, for whatever your goals are within your spaces? So in terms of our knowledge, understanding, thinking, and application, so today we'd kind of get to know some basic, but also some other features of Google Sheets, organize data using a variety of different criteria, continue to reflect upon the type of data we gather and how we look at that data and how we comb it, how we analyze it, how we observe it, and rooting it back to anti-racist practices. So we wanted to start off with a Google form. So I'm going to go to the Google form here. The link should be in the chat. And we wanted to do this in order to kind of get started on the Google Sheets, because one way to populate a Google Sheet is by gathering data, whatever that data may be, empathy surveys, maybe a co-generative dialogue that you're having with a group of students. You're gathering data. So today we chose to gather the data using a Google form in the form of a well-being check-in. So as you are submitting those responses with the Google form, you're getting sort of the back end of it. The Google Sheet is sort of collecting all of those responses. And we will talk about why these things are different colored here, which is something that you can do with Google Sheets. It's called conditional formatting. And you can get a quick visual impression from the data. I know that I have to check in with these two people who are, showing up red, or I can notice the gradient of yellow, orange, and red, which means that I need to follow up on that. And the greens are, for me, sort of a visual thumbs up. So being able to kind of curate and highlight, let's say, an electrical data sheet so you can get more information. And last week, we talked a little bit about an extension for Google Sheets called Autocrat. And again, I could add that extension onto the sheet. And every time I get a response that is sort of in the red, it can auto trigger a specific message or a specific, check-in form or an appointment form so that we can make that connection. So there's so many cool ways to use Google Form with Google Sheet, and then build your sheet in order to achieve a specific outcome. So thank you for filling out the form. We will go back to it when we talk about conditional formatting a little bit. So what is Google Sheet? Google Sheet is essentially the googly way of saying Excel. It's the googly version of it. So essentially, Microsoft, right? You have the Excel spreadsheet, but then you have Google Sheets, which is their version of it. I personally use more of the Google Sheet than I do the Excel because I love the collaborative nature of it. I love the fact that it's easy for me to access because I don't have a SharePoint, let's say, where I can work on it. So they're depending on the system that your board is part of and how accessible it may be for you. So again, rounding it back into street data. This is an excerpt from page 180 from street data, and it's at the very end of the book where we're now getting into combing through data, observing and analyzing data. And this is what the authors say about analyzing data. So I'm not going to read it out to you. You can take a read through it on your own. So the reason why we wanted to use Google Sheets as our tech tool for the last session was because of this, because when we have the data gathered, there is a protocol on page 180 on how to analyze the data. And the authors talk about using highlighters and using scissors. And so we wanted to be able to sort of leverage some of these great tools that educators have access to. And so how can we comb through data, observe and analyze trends, using the tech tools some of the educators have access to? So for us, that was leveraging Google Sheets and doing sort of similar things with that. It's just our pair of scissors and our highlighters are going to look a little bit different. So again, going back to why do we want to why do we want to gather the data? Why do we want to gather data that is stories, narratives, and artifacts? Why do we want to focus on the margins? Why do we want to put the learner, the families, the voices at the center? It goes back to the equity transformation cycle that the authors refer to, and I think it's in chapter 5 on page 68. And they really talk about, the usual model in classrooms, in schools, and in systems is really you plan something, you do it, you study what you did, and then you act on it or you reflect on it. So that's usually the model that happens. So the authors ask, well, what are you responding to if you don't know what you're responding to? Like, if you're responding to something, how do you know? What is it that you're responding to? So how can we be responsive to something without actually listening? So they center the listen as a big part of the equity transformation cycle. And they talk about the transformation cycle being an intentional anti-racist stance to center the voices of elders, community members, students, and families. So when we think about street data, we think about looking at data by actually listening to what the numbers, listening to what the qualitative data, the surveys is telling us. And the authors do talk about the fact that we need to slow things down. Yes, there is an urgency, but we need to slow the process down when we look at it. We need to feel the feelings of the data that we're looking at. We need to check our assumptions, our biases, our blind spots. We need to check those, our privilege, our social positionality. And we need to stay grounded in what the data is telling us. So don't shy away from the discomfort. It's okay if it's different from what you expected. Let's deal with what's actually being shared. So that's where our tools come in. So when we gather data in our today's world, or whether it be a conversation that we transpose into a sheet with all of the interviews and all of the information, how can we still use the tech tools to kind of do that same kind of analysis of the data?
Okay, so we are going to be just sort of like borrowing everything that we've learned so far and then playing around with Google Sheets. So we kind of have populated with fake data, with some data that we have in our Google Sheet there. So make sure that you have made a copy, and we're just going to be going through organizing, presenting, and analyzing the data. So there we have it. Well, I guess I can talk you through it, Iniel.
Isabel, I was going to ask you a question. So do you want to start sharing so you can, how do you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's either way. I can talk to you, and while you can create, you can create that. Okay, so so this is essentially what Google Sheets is. It looks very, very similar to Excel, and it has the same capabilities as Excel. So just like a spreadsheet, it's meant for you to analyze data. Now, like Google Sheets, there are new things that are being pushed out almost every single month. So, and when these new things come to light, you actually don't know. So one thing that we want to do, so first of all, this is usually a template that I would share with my colleagues to just sort of demonstrate what poorly collected data looks like. So as you can see, not only do you have blank data, you also have data sources that are occupying more than one cell. So for example, take a look at the headers. You have contact and name, both in two separate rows, even though contact name should be one cell. So before you start analyzing or even organizing data, it's important to sort of start organizing it first. So like presenting it in a workable manner. So you can very easily merge those cells there. Yep. And it's like what Emiel has said, like if you are finding this a little fast, we do have the instructions that are written out in the slide deck as well. So let's just say you wanted to collate contact name together. All you have to do is just highlight those two cells there, or no, just the contact name, contact and name. And then you can just merge that. Merge cells. Now, what's happening with this spreadsheet is that because there is like a filter that's already been preset, so you would probably have to first remove that filter first in the header. So if you go on over to data.
I'm going to make a new copy. I've been talking to myself.
Oh,
because I'm on mute. So here's the new copy.
Okay,
Here
yeah, perfect.
go.
So that's what everybody's
Okay.
seeing. So contact name, that's an issue there. So feel free, highlight that, go into format, merge cells, and you can just merge all, I guess. So as you can see, it only preserve one of the cells. So you do have to like play around with that. So you can do that with the headers. Just make sure that the information, the same type of information is contained in the same cell. So next thing you notice that there's on column A, you have everybody's names, first name and last name in the same cell. While sometimes that's useful, but sometimes you may want to organize people alphabetically by their last name or alphabetically by their first name. So if you highlight that row, head on over to data, you'll be able to see this thing called split text to column. And automatically it will just sort of read what that column looks like. And then you just have to sort of tell.
Yeah, and if it's separated by a comma, then you can choose whatever format that was already there. So here it can detect it automatically, or I can ask it to detect by space. Doesn't matter, I can do that, and then it will create two names.
Automatically.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then nothing, all your data is still going to get shifted towards the right. It's just simply inserted an additional row. So this is basically what we're going to be doing to sort of like clean up our data. And instead of having to go through it row by row or even fixing it, especially when we're collecting large amounts of data in the school aspect, you can simply just head on over to data again. And then there is like this button that's called data cleanup. So if you scroll down there, you'll see that Google Sheets is actually suggesting new things to clean up. So you can click on cleanup suggestions if you're not sure what your spreadsheet is, and then it will try to tell you like maybe you could delete some rows because it's empty, or you can try and remove any duplicate data. So as you can see, there's if you click on cleanup suggestions, there are all these exclamation marks that are popping up over the columns. So if you go click on those columns, it will tell you on the right-hand side what those errors are.
Do you want me to change it?
Yeah, and then you can say yes, and then it will change all the date formats into one way. Yeah. And then you can trim if you want to. Sometimes you can also ignore. So the way I see data cleanup is kind of similar to like the spell check that you go through with Word or Google Docs. So you can just simply do that. And obviously it is a new tool. So you kind of have to like play around with it, and it's not necessarily that smart yet, but like there are new features that are coming up. So the key thing with Google Sheets is that there are always going to be new tools for you to sort of play around with so that you're minimizing the amount of human work that needs to be done. So this is just sort of done by their AI, like Google Sheets is just reading the data to make sense of it all. Okay, so one last thing before we start is that we also want to remove that blank row that's in row 13, just because when we're calculating averages or when we're calculating the number of participants that have corresponded to this, that responded to this form, yeah, we wanted to make sure that that's it. Okay, so that simply is organizing data. And then now we're going to try and do a couple of things where we can also make sure that this set of data is readable. So when you're starting to collect a lot of data, you'll see that there's a lot of information. And when you're scrolling, it's almost like an unlimited scroll. So you're unable to see the header. So what we're going to be doing right now is that we're going to make sure that our headers are all fixed. So we can easily freeze that row or that column. So if you just head on over to, so highlight row 2. And if we go on over to data, is it data? Format. Sometimes when I don't know where everything is, I would just head on over to help and then just search it, freeze.
Oh, freeze, it's right here. You go to, there you go.
View freeze to row 2.
Yes.
Now freezing the rows or even columns allow you to kind of keep that those data fixed. And so those are usually useful for key information like your headers or your names. So that's basically what I would do for my grade books. I have my headers for my assessments, and then I also have my students' information on the left-hand side.
I also sometimes like freezing the first column, especially if I'm scrolling across a very large spreadsheet. I know which student or which class or whatever your column is, so that you can scroll this way and still not lose the starting point, and scroll up and down and not lose your headers.
Okay, so we know how to freeze rows and columns. And then now another piece of information that we could do is hiding particular types of data. Let's just say you have a student that has withdrawn, or but you still want to retain that information. Simply hiding those rows or columns before you share it with other people allows them to just see holistically the most current version of your data, but you're not necessarily removing that data point. So like what Inyal is doing right now, she has highlighted a particular row and then just simply right click, and then you'll see that option hide row. And you can always make that row visible again just by clicking that little black triangle. Once you've hidden that row or hidden that column, you can always click on the black triangle to make it reappear again. So again, this is, you're not manipulating the data, you're just simply sort of presenting it in a different view. And again, just as what Inyal has mentioned, we are bringing our own perspective and our own biases when we are playing around with data. And so when we are freezing the headers, or when we're hiding particular types of data, keep in mind of how this data is transforming to fit our own narratives or stories. Okay, are we ready for filtering and sorting? So now we have like a workable data sheet. So now we're going to try and analyze trends. Now there are two major functions that would allow us to see the trends very easily. One is by sorting, and the other one is by filtering. So as you can see, there's one column here that sort of measures the amount of donation that these people have put in. So that's an easy way for us to sort or filter. So we can sort it from the least amount or to the most amount, or vice versa. So the way you sort it, you simply have to highlight that column that you want to sort, and then you just have to sort, go to data and then select sort sheet from A to Z or Z to A. So A to Z, it's alphabetical, but it also does numerical as well. One thing to note with sorting is that the minute you sorted a sheet, you're unable to retain the way the sheet was populated. So it completely reorganizes your Google Sheet. So then it doesn't actually show you how it's being populated. So for example, if you're still collecting data from a Google form, you're unable to see which one is the most recent entry point once you have sorted or filtered.
Unless you have a timestamp.
Exactly.
On that Google form.
Yeah.
You can either go to data to sort, or you can right click and then you can sort as well, either in ascending or descending order.
Now, sorting is kind of a way for you to sort of see holistically what's happening in a trend, but you can also filter out and only view specific types of data. So let's just say we're going through the same column, and we can actually simply create a filtered view and only showcase entry points that have surpassed a particular amount, or members that have exceeded a certain number of years. So you can play around with either column. So let's just stick with H, and we can just try and put a filter on for anything that's beyond 30,000, I guess.
So you'll see all the values populated here. Isabella, should I uncheck the ones that are?
So once you have created your filter, you can actually create your own filter view. So filter by conditions. And you can say if it is greater than or less than, yeah.
What number did you say?
30.
30 or 30,000? 30?
Yeah, 30,000. And then it will automatically provide you with a filter view, and then you can just simply share this view to whoever you need to share it with. So again, this is bringing in a different lens. You're bringing in a different perspective on your data, and you can just share that. And if you wanted to remove this filter again, you simply have to click on that funnel again and just remove that filter. So you can just go back and select none. And then it will undo that filter, and you get to see all of your data again. So that's the difference between sorting and filtering. So sorting just looks at the entire sheet, and then filtering allows you to highlight. So that's kind of like that highlighting function. When we're combing through that data, we're highlighting those specific data points.
Sounds good. Any questions so far? Because we've cleaned up the data. Now we're sort of working on the presenting, the tools that allow us to present or curate or gather or collate certain pieces of information. Okay, I think it's good.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just say instead of using our Google form to collect data, we're also just so happen to, we want to just send the Google Sheet to somebody and then ask them fill it out accordingly. So just look at the headers and you just want to type in your own entry point. Now, sometimes when people are typing in their own data, everybody formats dates differently. Everybody types in their birth dates differently. So you want to sort of make sure that whenever there's some typing in their data, it's exactly the analyzable format that you wanted to use. So we have this thing that's called data validation. And so let's just say we're creating in the column of member years, we want to make sure that whatever is typed into that column is only numbers. So we can just sort of click on that column and then right click so that you have access to data validation. And then under the criteria, you just type in number. And then it will automatically say, oh, any number that's between 10 to 100. And you can actually add more criteria, but any times that somebody have written out a number or a letter, it will actually give them an error. So then they're unable to fill in that Google Sheet if they did not type in a number. So data validation is useful if you wanted to collect data through Google Sheets rather than Google Form.
So if I go and type 200, it should give me an error. Did I do the wrong one? Invalid. Must be a number between 1 and 100.
Yeah.
Now it's fine.
Awesome. So data validation can like make sure that your participants are like they know. So it's kind of like giving them the success criteria so they know exactly what is expected of them when they're typing in their own feedback or their own data points. And it also ensures that what you're collecting is going to be easily analyzable. And then so another thing that you can do is also conditional formatting. So similar to what—
Isabella, before you go on to conditional formatting, can I also say, like, if you do have, let's say you have a data spreadsheet with data, but you have additional categories or additional things that you want to then pull out from it. You can also use data validation to, let's say you want to do a list of items. So I might want to say they're in the regular stream, or they're an ELL learner, or they have an IEP. Let's say you want that. So then you can actually, when you have the data, you can go in and you can then select that based on the criteria or based on the information you have. And then on top of that, then what Isabella is going to talk about next is you can have sort of a conditional formatting on this column as well. So depending on what you pick, it will highlight different things. So data, for data validation, there are lots of options. You can do a list of item, which is what I have just done. You can do a number, as Isabella mentioned. Let's say you just want, yes or no, maybe a text. If it's a date category, so you can really curate that cell so that misinformation, or not misinformation, the wrong type of data is not inputted in there, which might then skew, what you're looking at later on.
Yeah, I use the list items one for my attendance list because it's easy. It's just present, absent, late. So then I can just easily do that instead of typing it in, because sometimes I just type it wrong and then it would not read it properly. Yeah, so let's just say we are, okay, so we're going back to our wellness check-in form there. How can we get all those colors out? So that's the thing that's called conditional formatting. And so you can already see all those different rules. Essentially, we're saying that if this cell contains a particular phrase, then highlight it green. Or if this this cell contains another phrase, then it will highlight a different color. So all you have to do is, again, just highlight where you're going to be populating that data. So in that case, it's just that column. So you can just select that entire column and then head on over to data and then select format and then select conditional formatting. Then it will automatically create a new rule for you. So then you can sort of create.
I'm going to go here.
Okay.
Format, conditional formatting. And you can, I've done gradients. So depending on how you like to see your data. So I can say if the text contains, or greater than, if the text is greater than 20, then whatever color you want, done. If you want to do another one, you just add another rule. If it's less than 10, is there a 10? Yeah, so less than 10, then should work. Oh, I didn't highlight it, sorry. Add another rule. And so you can have these columns pre-done so that as the data is coming in from the Google form, which is what I did, prior to opening up the form, I actually went in and I did the data I did sort of the conditional formatting. Is it the conditional formatting that I'm doing?
Yep. Yeah, it is conditional.
I did the conditional formatting prior. So as the data was coming in from the Google form, there you go. You'll see those things populate. So just a visual sort of quick reference as to what my data is like.
And it's a live document. So like, as long as your Google form is still live, it's still collecting responses, then the Google sheet that it's being populated, it will always going to refresh and include the latest responses. So that's how we are presenting our data with conditional formatting, data validation, filtering, or sorting. We also have to analyze. We have on our hand a set of equations that we can easily analyze that data so that we can actually create like midpoints or like averages that would allow us to sort of give a more quantitative point for our data. So if we can, I think I have there's some.
So while Isabella is talking about that, one of the ways that you can get a list of all of the, close this one. One of the ways that you can get a list of all of the functions is if you go to help on your Google Sheet, you'll see a function list there. And so when you click on that, it will give you all the functions and sort of a little blurb on it. So that's a great quick way to go and to learn about maybe a new a formula that you might want it to build in to your sheet. But the ones that we have here for you today, the ones that we use most often, we find are average, sum, COUNTIF, and are in between. So it's a random number generator. Isabella, do you want me to go back to the sheet to kind of demo those?
Yeah, for sure. So average and sum, they're relatively straightforward. So let's just hop on over to our columns G and H. So let's just play around with column H. So let's just say we have monetary information that we're collecting and we wanted to find out the average that people are donating. So you just simply click on the cell that you want to populate that information, go to the sigma function that's kind of look like a Z zigzag E that's on the top right corner there. Then you'll have access to your average function in capital letters, or you can type it out. If you are familiar with that, all you have to do is just type in equal sign average, and then you can just, you'll have access to that data, to that formula as well. So if you can just highlight the cell that you wanted to get your average, then you get your, type out your data, and then it will automatically fill it out for you because you're underneath that column. So that's how you would get your average value. You can also,
oh, it's telling me. See, it's telling me that it's the wrong thing. It should be between 1 and 100, but that's okay.
And you can do the same thing with the sum. So again, you can just do that. And, you know, if you just type equal and then just go to the sum, you can just type and like it will. Google Sheets is smart now that it knows that you want to calculate the sum of everything that's above.
So do I just go equal sum?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And then yeah, exactly.
And then should I select it?
Bracket.
Sorry, is my sheet too small for you to see, everyone?
No.
Should have asked that before. There we go. Yeah, there's a lot of intuitive features that are already built in with Google Sheet, which is quite fantastic, I think.
So average and sum is very straightforward. I really like using count or COUNTIF. So if we're there, and then if you're trying to use COUNTIF, you can provide a range and then the criteria. So the criteria could be like anything that's larger than a specific number. So we can do COUNTIF, bracket, and then you just simply highlight the range.
Is that okay?
Yep. And then comma. And then you can, yeah, do the quotations. And I'm just going to do the larger sign.
Oops.
30,000. Let's just say that.
And end quotation.
And then bracket. And then there you have it. There's approximately 12 people who had fulfilled that criteria. So COUNTIF. So the problem, I guess, with these functions is that sometimes you do require labels. So whenever I'm populating my data sheet with equations, I always have either a header or a label next to it. So then when my students or when my colleagues are populating their spreadsheet, they know what these equations are. If they're not sure, they can always highlight that cell and they are able to see the equation given to them at the top of their spreadsheet. So if, yeah, just like what Eniel has just done, just simply highlighting that cell, and then you will see that equation there.
And also here and here. I like using COUNTIF when I'm looking for a certain number. So whether it be attendance or whether it be maybe a level that you're looking at, you're collecting, let's say, the map data of reading levels that you have. and you're just looking for how many, just a quick count instead of sitting there counting. You can just do a count if with your the quotation is what your condition is. So you're selecting the cells, and then you're identifying the condition that you're selecting with. So that's the COUNTIF, and I like the random one. I can't wait for you to explain the random one.
Yeah, so obviously with the fact that we've been hybrid or virtual learning, some of my students are unable to conduct their experiments live because they're online. And so something that I've done is that I provided them with Google Sheets with raw data, but instead of trying to calculate and make sure that they all have distinctly different data, I basically know that there's a particular range of data that would work. So I would use RAND between that range to generate a list of basically like mass values or temperature values for me to give out to my students. So all I have to do is just sort of like go to an empty cell and just go equal signs, RAND between, and then I will be able to give a low number and a high number. So for example, if we're doing pH scale, we know that the scale goes from 0 to 14. So if I'm giving my students a pH value, I don't have to sort of like think, okay, this person has 7, that person has 6. I can just randomly populate a spreadsheet, and then I'll say, okay, according to your student number, just pick a row, and then you are going to analyze the data that's given to you there. So now everybody will have a unique set of data that they can analyze, and they can just demonstrate that analysis side of things without having me to sort of reinvent and like type in manually what those data are. So like that's something that I've done in the science classroom. That's also something that I've done to populate this Google spreadsheet as well using RAND between function. But those are some of the functions that we've been using. Obviously, there's a lot more and a lot of different other functions that would be helpful for you. I personally have found that the presenting data piece to be more helpful than analyzing in terms of my usage for Google Sheets, just because I tend to collect a lot of like grade information and like their Google form feedback, and just sort of like making sense of all of that in my grade book has been helpful in terms of color coding and using data validation, all that.
And if you have something that you love using about Google Sheets, like a little hack or a fun little tip, please do share in the chat. Some of the things that I love about, in addition to all the things that I love that's already shared with you, one of my favorite things is the alternating colors for, I'm a visual person, so I like, I think we're going to talk about that after, but let me go to another one. I like the checkbox. I like putting checkboxes so I can, once I've followed up with something, or I've looked up the data, I can just check it off. And if I want the checkbox, then I can also, this is a cool little hack. Instead of repeating it for every single one, you just hold down that little blue square at the end of the cell. And if you just extend it where you want it, it just repeats it. And the same thing with numbers as well. So if you're trying to number something and you have, let's say, 3 consecutive, but you want to keep going, again, you highlight the first 3 boxes, you hold on to that blue, and if you keep going, it'll just generate that number list. And if you want the same thing repeated over and over again, instead of cutting and pasting, you can just, if you want the same text or number, you just do that as well. So I found those little things to be helpful when I'm trying to clean up, present, or do a little checklist when I'm analyzing.
Yeah, and like Brenda's mentioned, like pivot tables as well. Like pivot tables are a great way to sort of visually represent your data instead of like having to deal with all that raw data. So if you if you're going to create a pivot table, all you have to do is just go over to insert, and then there's an option there to pivot table, and then it will ask you to insert the table on a separate sheet or on a new sheet. So you can just create a new sheet, and then it will just populate a new tab.
Oh, I gotta create. Should I choose?
Perfect. And then all you have to do is just sort of add the criterion. Like, what do you want to display? Is it name and phone numbers? So you can just sort of play around with it. And something that we're going to mention, the Google Data Studio is also kind of something similar where you can visually represent your data as well.
So some of the new things that we found recently that we've seen recently being added to Google Sheet, or at least in the last year, is the alternating colors. So if you're presenting and you want sort of the gradient of color for easy visibility, you can choose alternating color, and then it will actually ask you to choose the cells, and then you can choose your color style, which is always fun. The other great one is the slicer, which I've not used very often. Where is the slicer? Is it under insert? There you go, add slicer. And it's sort of like having a little pivot table that you have access to, but in a little tab. And then I'm just going to maybe try that. And then you can actually move that wherever you want, and then you can choose based on different criteria as well. And the last one, I think, is column stats, which I thought was really fun. Delete. So column stats, if I go to column H again, and then I go to column stats, which is right here, I can see the distribution. Instead of creating a bar graph or having to create it separately, you can sort of see the data visually in terms of distribution or in terms of count. So that's a great way, and you can see the frequency as well down here. So that's a great way to get a quick view of what the data is telling you in terms of frequency, in terms of distribution. So that was new that we wanted to share. So before Isabella talks about Google Studio, we wanted to share mapping, which is great if you wanted to do like a geographical impression of where your learners are, or just in terms of access points to different services. What you would do is here you need to have a column with addresses. So even though we found out on the weekend when Isabella and I were practicing that even though these are fake addresses, some of them actually exist. So what you would do is you would have to add the extension. So it's an extension that you have to add onto your sheets. It's called Mapping Sheets, and you can start mapping, and then it will pull up that add-on. I don't know why it keeps asking me this survey all this time, but I'm going to select the categories. So when I want, it's usually the column headings. So I want the first name. I want potentially the last name, and then the street location. And then I'm going to build a map. So those columns are just so that when you click on the actual point on the map, it will give you the information. So it's telling me that it couldn't find these particular locations, which is fine. Those are fake addresses anyways. And then what it has done, it's taken those geolocations and put it on a map for me. And then when I click on a particular tag, those are the categories that I picked. So that was the name, and then it filtered by first name, last name. So that's a great little additional tool if you are looking at data in terms of demographic or geographical data. Isabella, should I pass it on to you in terms of Google Studio? And this was Brendan, this one's for you.
And I can sort of demo it if that's.
Yeah, let me stop sharing.
Okay. So like what I mentioned before, Google Data Studio is kind of like a pivot table, but like more so, especially for those who are quite visually inclined. It allows you to sort of create like an infographic very easily. So all you have to do is just go over to datastudio.google.com, and then you just create a blank report. So when you are creating a blank report, it will ask you to locate where that source is. Now, a lot of our things are coming from Google Sheet, but if you have your own website, you can actually pull information from Google Analytics or Amazon, all of that. So you can actually have a bunch of different search engine results that is related to Google, but there's also non-Google partners as well. So they can definitely play around with that. If you're clicking onto Google Sheet, it will read your drive and it will ask you to select the Google Sheets that you want to analyze. So let's just say that that's what's happening. And then you have imported the Google Sheet. So this is the Google Sheet information that is pulled in from the check-in question. The first table that it will present is like the driest version of the table. So automatically it will give you like this grid background, and it will give you like sort of like a text count of like, okay, so these are the questions and this is the count of participants that have answered this response. But what's great about it is that you can actually add additional data. So you can actually combine two different Google Sheets information to one single infographic, or you can actually visually represent this using various different types of data. And what's great about it, because it's kind of like meant to be an infographic, it allows you to align and stuff. So like when you're putting in the charts or even like the trend line, it will just be reading all that information from your Google Sheet. So as your Google Sheet is getting populated, your Data Studio report is also changing dynamically. So you can simply share this with another person so that they can either import new sets of data. So like if you have co-teachers who are collecting information from their own classes, you can actually bring this in so that you have like a holistic view of the year, how everybody's doing within that year. Or you have other people, parents who want to see it, then you can just sort of share that, and then this is view only. So if this is view only, this is how it presents itself, kind of. It's like a printable paper in a sense. So you can actually just print this out if you want. If you want to go back to editing, you can also add pages, you can add titles. So this is like check-in, question, report. So you can actually make it as visually appealing as possible. So the creativity is in your wheelhouse. So like you can play around with it, and you can just sort of have create your own dynamic report without you having to go into Sheets, insert chart, and then like update the sheet, because all you have to worry about at this point is just simply making sure that what you're collecting is usable data. So making sure the questions that you're asking on check-in questions will give you usable data, making sure that when people are typing in, they're filling in the Google Sheet, that's also like, so that's the data validation piece. And so then you can always have that visual piece, and you can always, and there's many different things. This is just, there's a tree map for like qualitative analysis. So you can actually see, okay, majority of us are feeling pretty good. A few of us are feeling kind of blah. So that's a new tool that Google has pushed out, and it's quite powerful, I would say. And you're not limited to just one page. You can actually create multiple pages, and you can actually rename them so you can create a full report, especially like an annual report. Like this is what's happening in September, and you have like a monthly report on how your classes is doing. So yeah, that's
amazing. Brendan's going to lead the next session on Google Data Studio, right, Brendan? That'd be awesome to learn.
Yeah, no, I've actually just put a link in the chat on a session I've run before for teachers here, and I just made a dummy little report with dummy data showing how you could use it to, you can bring together all that satellite data, I guess, generally, but for your teaching staff at the start of a year, so that teachers can just click on their class and see information relevant to their students. But yeah, anyway, it's a nice one.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So we are right on time to end today, Isabella. That is a definite plus. Look at us go. again, bringing it all back to this text that we started with on page 180 of the text, the authors do go through an actual protocol. They've timed it, they've asked questions, they've given sort of facilitator guide and language to do this kind of work, whether you choose to do it with highlighters and scissors or whether you choose to do it with a tech tool. Really, it's about connecting. So what was the process of gathering data? So checking in with your team, sharing the process of gathering the data, and asking and listening, what do you predict the data may reveal? And there's a lot of guidance and scaffolding provided by the authors to have that conversation with the group of people that you are looking and combing through the data with. Then observing, so observing in terms of what is the data telling us? What are we hearing from the students and adults? And what stands out from the data? So again, looking at whether it be highlighted or you've used, what shows up. And interpret, and again, keeping in mind the assumptions and blind spots when we are interpreting the data, but what does the data reveal? And then sitting in that discomfort if you need to, right? And what feelings does this data evoke for you? And that whole vulnerability piece, which has a whole chapter onto itself. And then finally, these are important questions that we take away from, what matters about this data? Why do we want to collect it anyways? How does it or doesn't it stand up to our vision of what we thought was happening? Where is the greatest opportunity in this? And I love that question, kind of just rephrasing from a deficit to an asset-based point of view. And what will help us learn more? What are our next steps? Who do we have to talk to? What do we have to gather more? What will help us move towards pedagogy of voice, away from pedagogy of compliance? And what steps or actions might come next? So that is a great protocol. I can't wait to actually try it out in whatever environment that I'm in to see how it goes. We thank you again for spending the hour with us. These recordings will be available if you wanted to take, if you needed to go back or share it with someone else. Your slide deck does have all the resources that we used for the last 2 sessions. And we encourage you to stay in touch with us so that we can share in your journey. We would love for you to share with us you as well, so that we can learn from each other and continue to form a community near and far. So thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today.
And we still have gifts.
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.